This is going to be the last video for lecture 10, hopefully. I'm going to play this video of the prodigal son. That will be the end of our Luke part, and then we'll go into John. This is a modern updated version of the prodigal son.
Constantly. I know I'm not a perfect dad. I know I wasn't able to give you everything you wanted. It's one of my deepest regrets. But I'd give everything I have for you. I still remember the day you were born. I still remember when we played catch together. I remember when we just talked. Some of my best days. I want to miss some of that. I've watched you grow up. I've seen you in your happiest moments. And I was with you in your moments of sadness. I know your tendencies to get angry. And there are times you get self-centered. But it can't make me love you less. Come on, son. Get on. Dad, you don't need to stay up for me. Just go to sleep. Stop! Why are you always touching me? I just want to know you're... Stop! doing? Stop! Get out of here right now, son! No, Dad, stop! You gotta run! What are you doing? Wait! Go! Stop! I believe in you, son. What you did in the past, it's okay. My love for you will not change. There were so many sleepless nights that I waited for you. There was hurt and pain I'm sure you didn't see. There was distance and silence that we both experienced. But they couldn't diminish my desire to see you. I've always loved you. I never thought once I would leave you. I'll never stop being your father. You need to know that. And I want you to know that this is what I want. Because it means you get a second chance to live. A second chance to love. You mean more to me than life itself. I give my life 1,000 times for you. Son, I will always love you because I'll never stop being your father, and you'll always be my son.
What's so meaningful about this interpretation of the prodigal son is it highlights what's so important about the teaching of the prodigal son, that the Father, God, is like a parent who loves so much that he will continue to forgive and welcome a child home no matter what he or she has done. But then this video goes one step further and shows us that the Father is also willing to die or send his son to die for us in our place, to atone for the sins that we've done. So it's just really a beautiful expression of this prodigal son, and of the story of Jesus as well. On that sad note, we're going to end Luke, and we're going to move forward with John. I wish I had more time to talk about John. It really physically pains me that I'm going to be doing this in like 5 minutes, 6 minutes. But John, the Gospel of John is very different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You know, it's not one of the synoptic Gospels. We think that John, the son of Zebedee, who's one of the original apostles, was the one who is the author, or at least partly the author of this gospel. He does not actually appear in the narrative, but there is this figure called the beloved disciple that shows up quite a bit. And most likely that's a way to say that John was the one who was involved in the writing of this. And so we know that John, son of Zebedee, after Jesus' death and resurrection, he moves to, we think, Ephesus, and he has a group of disciples around him, and it's most likely that him and his disciples are the ones who write and put together this Gospel of John, probably later than the other Gospels are written. Though he was in Ephesus around 70, this gospel may not have been finished until maybe 85 or 90. We don't know for sure. But what's cool about John is that it's very clear what the purpose of this narrative is. At the end, John says, Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded here, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So you see that John's very clear about, I've picked certain things to talk to about, certain stories to highlight, in order that you might come to the belief that Jesus is the Christ. At the end of this, that you will be able to follow Jesus. And so that's a cool way to frame the whole gospel, really. So some of the things I want to highlight about John is that it has two parts. The first called the Book of Signs, and this is when Jesus does his miracles or signs and he teaches. And then the Book of Glory, which is more of Jesus interacting with his disciples and privately teaching them, and then his death and resurrection. And it all begins with this beautiful prologue about Jesus being the Word or the Logos that you can read in John 1 through 18. So signs are the word that John uses to talk about Jesus' miracles. And here he wants to point out that each miracle that he talks about in his gospel has a deeper meaning. And each of them point to characteristics about Jesus, show us a deeper truth about Jesus. So the signs point to something other than just the miracle. They prompt people to believe in Jesus when they actually read about them or hear about them. So the signs in John's gospel are Jesus turning water into wine at the Cana of Galilee wedding, the healing of the official son, the healing of the lame man at the pool, the feeding of the 5,000, which is actually in all three of the other gospels, Jesus walking on water, Jesus healing a man who's born blind, and then the seventh sign is Jesus raising his friend Lazarus from the dead in front of a large group of people. This becomes the last straw in the Gospel of John for the Jewish leaders. So many people see him raise this guy from the dead, and the Jewish leaders are like, okay, we've got to put this guy out of commission. But in this story, there's also a climax here. When Jesus is talking to Mary and Martha, in this case Martha, after Lazarus has died, Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, Martha said. I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. So this is the climactic confession, because this is exactly what John wants people to say, that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And so it's like a model of belief for those of us who are reading the gospel or hearing the gospel for the first time. So one of the interesting things about John's gospel is that he puts these I am statements throughout the gospel to talk about who Jesus is. And each of them are connected to one of the signs that Jesus does, and also helps us understand more about Jesus. So these are the I am statements that are here in the gospel. I am the bread of life, Jesus says, when he feeds the 5,000. I am the light of the world, Jesus says, during one of the festivals where they put lights out, and he kind of connects it to himself. I am the gate for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and I am the true vine. So throughout John, you get these I am statements from Jesus. And if you'll recall, when we think about Moses and the burning bush, and how God told Moses what his name was, that his name was I am who I am, Yahweh. Here, when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, or I am whatever, he also very often just says, I am. Someone asks him, are you this person? And he says, I am. And so this is John's way of talking about Jesus as being God. Like here, Jesus is using the personal name of God, I am, in his own declarations about himself. So though we have not heard the other gospel writers say Jesus is God, they say certainly Jesus is God's Son. Here, John wants to highlight that Jesus is not just God's Son, but Jesus and the Father are one. So when Jesus says I am, he's identifying himself with God, which is a theological development that happened, in the early church, maybe a little bit later in the first century. So it makes sense that John, which is probably the last gospel written, is the one that wants to highlight that Jesus is not just human, but Jesus is also divine. And that, of course, becomes one of the central theological claims of the early Christians, which we will talk about when we get to the chapter on theology as well. So this is going to wrap up our section on the Gospels, which has been long, but thank you for bearing with me, since I love the Gospels, and I wish I could have given you more on John, but the Gospels are just an amazing way to look at the life of Jesus from different perspectives and help us understand how we, as Christians, can be more like Jesus as well. And I'm signing off.